While jogging through my own neighborhood, 6 of my former officers stopped me for being a black man in a rich area. They beat me, tossed me, and urinated on me while I lay convulsing on the pavement. Their laughter only stopped when they finally realized they had just tortured and degraded their former chief of police. The pre-dawn air in my neighborhood has a specific kind of stillness, a cool, quiet peace that feels like a secret the rest of the world isn't privy to yet. For the 5 years since I hung up my uniform and retired as the city's chief of police, this has been my sanctuary. I was jogging, my breath pluming in the crisp air, my feet finding a familiar rhythm on the pristine asphalt of Oak Street. I bought my house here with my pension, a handsome 2-story colonial that was a world away from the gritty city precincts where I'd spent 30 years of my life. As a black man, now in my late 50s, running through the wealthiest and statistically whitest part of the city, I was always acutely aware of the optics. I knew, with the weary certainty of a lifetime of experience, that this conversation was inevitable. Sooner or later, I would be stopped by some fresh-faced officer, some kid who joined the force long after my time, who wouldn't know my face from Adam's. My appearance had certainly changed. The crisp, pressed uniform had been replaced by sweatpants and a hoodie. The clean-shaven, authoritative jawline from my official portrait, the one that still hangs in the station lobby, was now obscured by a salt and pepper beard and the softer lines of a man who enjoys his retirement. I was a ghost of the man who once ran the department, a civilian in the truest sense of the word. But I had held onto a sliver of hope, a naive belief that the culture I had fought so hard to instill in the department had survived my departure. I had built my career on a simple, yet revolutionary, principle: lead with your words, not your weapons. De-escalation, community policing, mutual respect. These weren't just buzzwords to me. They were the pillars of the legacy I had tried to build. As the first rays of sun began to slice through the canopy of old oak trees, I was about to discover that my entire legacy had been burned to the ground. A patrol car, a newer model than the ones we had in my day, slowed to a crawl beside me, its tires a low hiss on the pavement. The officer in the passenger seat, a young man with a sharp, angular face and the kind of cheap sunglasses that cops seem to love, rolled down his window. "You lost?" he called out, his tone a lazy, condescending drawl. It was the question, the one I had been stealing myself for 5 years. I chose to ignore him, keeping my pace steady, my eyes fixed on the horizon. A flicker of irritation crossed his face. He hit the siren, a short, sharp burst of sound that shattered the morning's peace. "Hey, I'm talking to you," he barked. "This isn't your neighborhood." I slowed to a stop, my hands held loosely at my sides, away from my body, an old habit. "Actually," I said, my voice calm, "it is. I live right there." I pointed to my house, its porch light still glowing a warm yellow, just 3 doors down. He laughed, a short, ugly bark of a sound. "Right, and I'm the mayor. What are you really doing out here this early?" "Casing houses." My stomach tightened. It was a familiar, visceral clenching, the same feeling I used to get just before a high-risk raid, the electric dread that signaled something was about to go very, very wrong. I could have ended it right there. I could have pulled out the retired chief card, dropped my name, and watched his arrogant smirk dissolve into panicked respect. But a different, more dangerous thought took hold. I needed to see this through. I needed to know what had become of my officers when they thought no one of importance was watching. It was a test, I told myself, a necessary audit of my own life's work, even if it meant putting my own safety on the line. I had no idea how far they would take it. The officer got out of the car, his movements slow and deliberate, a predator sizing up its prey. His partner, the driver, began to radio something in, his voice a low, indecipherable murmur. "You really expect me to believe you live in one of these?" the first officer sneered, gesturing vaguely at the stately homes that lined the street. "These houses go for $500,000 easy." He began to circle me slowly, a shark in blue, shining his high-powered flashlight directly in my eyes, even though the sun was now painting the sky in shades of pink and orange. "Let me see some ID," he commanded, "and keep your hands where I can see them." I reached into the pocket of my sweatpants for my wallet, my movements slow and measured. Slowly, he yelled, his hand reflexively dropping to the butt of his service weapon. Don't make any sudden moves. I handed him my driver's license. He squinted at it, the flashlight beam glinting off the plastic. Richard Thompson, for 25, Oak Street, he read aloud, a sarcastic lilt in his voice. Nice try. Probably a fake. Instead of returning it, he slipped my ID into his own pocket. Then he spoke into the radio on his shoulder. Calling for backup. We have a suspicious individual, possible 459 in progress. A break-in. He was manufacturing a crime out of thin air. I'd like my identification back. Officer, I said, my voice still level, though the ice in my stomach was beginning to spread through my veins. His partner got out of the car, then a larger, heavier man who positioned himself directly behind me, cutting off any potential escape route. You're being awfully demanding for someone in your position, the second officer said, his voice a low rumble. Maybe you should shut your mouth and let us do our jobs. The first officer stepped closer, his face inches from mine. We've had a string of break-ins around here recently, he said, his breath smelling of stale coffee. Description was a black male in his 50s. You fit the bill perfectly. He told me to turn around and place my hands on the hood of the patrol car for a search. On what probable cause? I asked, the old familiar words of the law feeling alien and useless in my mouth. That was a mistake. He grabbed my wrist, twisting it sharply behind my back with a practiced, brutal efficiency. I don't need probable cause when you're acting suspicious, he hissed in my ear. Now spread your legs. He kicked my feet apart with such force that I stumbled, my chest hitting the cold metal of the hood. While he held me pinned, his partner began to rifle through my pockets. He pulled out my phone, looked at it for a second, and then casually tossed it onto the pavement. He brought his heavy boot down on it, with a sickening crunch of glass and plastic. Oops, he said, the feigned apology dripping with malice. Guess you can't call your lawyer now. When I instinctively tried to straighten up, to push myself off the car, the first officer slammed me face first back down onto the hood. Did I say you could move? He snarled. A starburst of pain exploded behind my eyes. I felt the bridge of my nose crush against the unyielding metal, and the warm, coppery taste of blood filled my mouth. This was my department. These were the men who had sworn an oath I had helped write, and they were treating me like an animal. The second officer laughed. Looks like he's resisting, partner. That's a felony. In the next moment, my hands were wrenched behind me, and I felt the cold, sharp bite of handcuffs around my wrists. They cinched them so tight that my hands went numb almost instantly. Just then, 2 more patrol cars screeched to a halt, their tires tearing at the asphalt, their lights painting the tranquil morning in frantic strokes of red and blue. 4 more officers piled out, surrounding me, their energy a chaotic, aggressive buzz. One of them, a man with a thick neck and a cruel sneer, seemed to assess the situation instantly. Another one who doesn't belong here, he said, and then, without any warning, he drove his knee hard into my stomach. The air rushed out of my lungs in a silent, agonizing gasp. I doubled over, and that's when they all started. It was a blur of shoves and blows, a sickening pinball game with me as the ball. They pushed me back and forth between them, laughing as I stumbled, my cuffed hands offering no way to break my fall. Look at him, one of them jeered. Can barely stand. Probably high on something. Another officer grabbed me by the hair and slammed my head sideways into the patrol car's window, the impact sending another shockwave of pain through my skull. The first officer, the one with the sunglasses, stepped back and drew his taser. The sound of it charging, that high-pitched electric hum, is a sound I will hear in my nightmares for the rest of my life. Stop resisting, he yelled, a performative shout for the benefit of any curious neighbors who might be peering through their blinds, even though I was just standing there, bleeding and gasping for air. Every muscle in my body clenched in anticipation of the pain I knew was coming, a pain I'd seen inflicted 100 times, but had never imagined I would feel myself. He fired. The 2 metal prongs hit my chest with a sharp thud, and then a million volts of raw, white-hot agony tore through my body. I collapsed to the ground, my body a marionette with its strings cut, convulsing uncontrollably on the damp pavement. I tried to scream my name, to tell them who I was, but my jaw was locked, my tongue a useless piece of meat in my mouth. Only a series of guttural, inhuman sounds came out. While I was still twitching on the ground, his partner started kicking me in the ribs, a steady, rhythmic thud of boot against bone. I heard a sickening crack. "That's for making us waste our morning," he grunted with each kick. Another officer, younger than the others, pulled out his phone and started recording, laughing about how this would make great training footage. Then came the ultimate degradation. One of the officers, his face a blur of smug satisfaction, unzipped his pants. He stood over me and began to urinate, a warm, foul-smelling stream soaking my shirt and face while I was still twitching from the aftershocks of the taser. "This is what we think of criminals in this neighborhood," he announced, as the others cheered and laughed. The humiliation burned hotter than the taser, more intensely than the searing pain of my broken ribs. I had dedicated my life to that badge, to the ideals it was supposed to represent. And now, they were literally pissing all over my legacy. When he finished, another officer grabbed me by the hair and shoved my face into the puddle on the pavement. "Clean it up," he growled, grinding my cheek into the rough asphalt and his colleagues' urine while the others took photos with their phones. As I lay there, a broken, bleeding, and humiliated heap on the street, I called home. A black department SUV pulled up. Captain Adams stepped out. He was one of the few veterans still on the force from my time, a man I had personally promoted. The first officer, the taser wielder, called out with a proud swagger in his voice. "Morning, Captain. We got this guy breaking into houses. Had to use a little force when he started resisting." Adams walked over slowly, his eyes taking in the scene. He looked down at my face, and every ounce of color drained from his. His jaw went slack. "Oh my God," he whispered, his voice a choked, horrified sound. "Chief Thompson?" "Chief." The officer who had just been zipping up his pants stared from Adams to me, his face a mask of dawning, abject horror. "Chief," he stammered. That's Chief Thompson, you idiot." Adams finally roared, his voice cracking with a mixture of fury and disbelief. "He ran this department for 15 years. He hired me. His portrait is hanging in our damn lobby." The effect was instantaneous. It was as if a switch had been flipped. The swaggering, laughing pack of predators transformed into a group of terrified, scrambling children. The officer who had tossed me dropped my ID on the ground, as if it were radioactive, and backed away. His partner, the kicker, began frantically wiping at my face with the sleeve of his jacket, his hand shaking so violently he was just smearing the blood and urine around. Adams kept repeating my name, a desperate litany, as he fumbled for his phone to call for an ambulance. The officer who had urinated on me ran to his patrol car, grabbed a water bottle, and started frantically dumping it over my head. A pathetic, absurd attempt to wash away his crime. Two other officers hastily unlocked my cuffs, and a searing, pins and needles pain shot through my hands as blood rushed back into them. One of them, his face pale and sweaty, kept muttering, "I'm so sorry, sir, I'm so sorry," as he tried to help me sit up, but the agony in my ribs was so intense that I couldn't move without gasping. The ambulance arrived in what felt like seconds, though it was probably only a few minutes. The paramedics' faces were a picture of confusion as they took in the bizarre scene. 6 police officers standing around a single, beaten man, now treating him with a sudden, panicked reverence, as if he were made of spun glass. They loaded me onto a stretcher with excruciating care, while Adams climbed into the back of the ambulance with me. He didn't stop apologizing the entire ride to the hospital, his voice a torrent of "I didn't know," and "I can't believe they were capable of this." Every bump in the road sent a fresh wave of agony through my ribs, and I just stared up at the ceiling, trying to breathe, trying not to be sick. At the hospital, they wheeled me directly into a trauma room. A team of nurses descended on me, their movements efficient and professional. One of them began taking photographs of everything. The 2 angry, red welts on my chest where the taser prongs had hit, the perfect, boot-shaped bruises already purpling on my ribs, my smashed and swollen nose, the raw abrasions on my face from being ground into the pavement. A young nurse leaned in and asked quietly if I wanted to file a police report. Adams, who had been pacing nervously in the hallway, overheard her. He came into the room, his face grim, and asked if we could speak privately after they had finished my x-rays. The doctor confirmed the diagnosis: 2 cracked ribs, a broken nose, and the taser burns, he said, would likely leave permanent scars. Once we were alone, Adam started begging. He pleaded with me to let him handle this internally. He swore the officers would face real consequences, that he would personally see to it that justice was served. But I could see the sweat beading on his forehead, the slight tremor in his hands. He knew this was a ticking bomb that could blow up the entire department. "Internal affairs better be here within the hour, Captain," I said, my voice a low, gravelly rasp. "Or my next call is to the FBI." He practically ran from the room. Catherine Gonzalez from Internal Affairs arrived in 45 minutes. She was all business, carrying 2 large evidence bags and a digital recorder. She had my bloody, torn shirt sealed in one bag and my urine-soaked pants in the other before she even introduced herself, her movements precise as she labeled everything with case numbers. While Adams paced like a caged animal outside the door, she took my official statement, her questions sharp and incisive, demanding every single detail. She told me she had already pulled the body cam footage from all 6 officers and the dash cam recordings from the 3 patrol cars. She took her own set of high-resolution photos of my injuries and had me sign a stack of forms authorizing the release of my medical records. It was late afternoon by the time they discharged me. Adams drove me home in his personal car, the silence between us thick with everything that had been said and everything that hadn't. As he was helping me out of the car, my ribs screaming with every movement, I saw my neighbor, Nicole Wells, getting her mail. We had been neighbors for 5 years, exchanging pleasantries over the fence, borrowing the occasional egg or cup of sugar. She stared at me, at my battered face, and the police captain helping me, for a long, pregnant second before her eyes darted away. She scurried back into her house without a word. And in that moment, the shame hit me harder than any of the blows I had sustained. The entire neighborhood had probably seen it. They'd seen me beaten, tossed, and pissed on like a dog in the street. That night, sleep was impossible. Every creak of the house, every passing car sent a jolt of adrenaline through me. I could still feel the phantom current of the taser running through my muscles, making them twitch and cramp. And no matter how many times I showered, I couldn't wash away the phantom smell of urine. I pulled a notebook from my desk, and through the haze of pain and medication, I began to write. I wrote down every detail I could remember: which officer had said which slur, who had kicked me where, who had laughed, who had just stood by and watched. The rage was a pure, clean fuel, cutting through the pain and allowing me to fill page after page. The next morning, I started calling civil rights attorneys. Russell Marshall, a lawyer with a reputation as a giant killer, answered his own phone. He told me he had 112 cases against police departments in the last 5 years. He was at my house that afternoon, spreading files across my kitchen table, his mind already mapping out a 2-pronged strategy: criminal charges through the DA's office and a massive civil lawsuit against the city. "They will try to bury this," he warned me, "and the police union will protect those officers with everything they have." As if on cue, my phone rang. It was Wayne Ford, the president of the police union. He spoke in a smooth, oily voice about mutual misunderstandings. He actually used the word misunderstanding to describe the act of his officers urinating on me and breaking my ribs. He suggested we could work out a reasonable settlement that would be good for everyone involved. I hung up on him mid-sentence. Russell smiled. "Exactly the right move," he said. 3 days later, Adams confirmed that all 6 officers had been placed on paid administrative leave. It was the first predictable move in the department's playbook. The police union immediately released a statement decrying a rush to judgment and emphasizing the importance of due process for the officers. Reading their carefully lawyered words, their defense of the men who had tortured me, made my stomach churn. This was the same union I had championed, the same one I had fought for during contract negotiations when I was chief. The betrayal cut deeper than any physical wound. A few texts trickled in from former colleagues. But mostly, there was a deafening silence from the men and women I had worked with for decades. One of them actually had the nerve to suggest I should have identified myself sooner, as if it were my fault for not announcing my status fast enough to prevent them from brutalizing me. The isolation was crushing. On the fourth day, there was a knock on my door that made my entire body seize with panic. It was my neighbor, Nicole Wells. She stood on my porch, looking terrified, clutching a small USB drive in her trembling hand. Her doorbell camera, she whispered, had recorded the entire incident. She was scared to death of retaliation from the department if she came forward, but she knew she had to do the right thing. I thanked her, my voice thick with an emotion I couldn't name, and promised to protect her identity. That afternoon, Gonzalez from IA called with another predictable update. 3 of the officers' body cams had mysteriously malfunctioned during my arrest. The dash cam from the first patrol car also had suspicious gaps in the recording. The cover-up was already in full swing. The next morning, Eugene Reynolds from the city attorney's office called my lawyer with a settlement offer. It was a substantial amount of money, more than my annual pension, but it came with strings. I would have to sign an ironclad NDA, and there would be no admission of wrongdoing from the department. They were trying to buy my silence. The weeks that followed were a blur of legal maneuvering and psychological torment. My therapy sessions were grueling, forcing me to relive the trauma in excruciating detail. I was diagnosed with severe PTSD. The sound of a buzzing fluorescent light or a passing siren could send me into a full-blown panic attack. The city, meanwhile, was playing dirty. They launched a campaign of harassment through the Code Enforcement Department, hitting me with a series of bogus citations. My grass was an inch too tall, my trash cans were 2 feet too far from the curb. It was petty, vindictive, and a clear attempt at intimidation. We documented every citation for our retaliation claim. The city attorney called again, this time with a new offer and a veiled threat. They would increase the settlement, but if I didn't take it, their investigators would start digging into my time as chief, looking for any irregularities that could affect my pension. They're scared, Russell said with a grim smile. Desperate people make threats. Captain Adams, risking his own career, met me at a late-night diner to warn me that the union was planning to change its story. They were going to claim I had been aggressive, that I had reached for something that looked like a weapon, a classic, disgusting tactic to justify their use of force. The legal battle culminated in a deposition that lasted for 8 grueling hours. The city's lawyers grilled me relentlessly, trying to twist my words, to paint me as an unreliable, angry man who had provoked the attack. They showed me crime scene photos of my own bloody face and asked if I thought I might have caused my own injuries by resisting. I stayed calm, sticking to the facts, my voice a monotone of practiced control. The turning point came during the discovery process. Russell called me, laughing so hard he could barely speak. The city had been forced to turn over all evidence, including the contents of the officers' personal cell phones. In one of them, the young officer who had been recording for training footage had forgotten to delete the video. It was all there. The video showed me standing completely still, my hands empty and visible when they attacked. It captured them laughing as I tried to tell them who I was. It showed the taser being deployed while I was doing nothing but bleeding. This video, Russell said, his voice filled with a cold, triumphant fury, is going to win us this case. The city knew it too. They agreed to mediation. For 9 hours, we sat in a sterile hotel conference room, a team of lawyers on each side. They offered money, but I wanted more. I wanted reform. I demanded mandatory de-escalation training be reinstated, the creation of a civilian oversight board, and regular body camera audits. The final settlement was a compromise. The city agreed to most of my policy demands and a substantial financial payout. But they refused to issue a formal apology, offering only a carefully worded statement expressing regret for the unfortunate incident. It was a bitter pill, but Russell convinced me it was the best we were going to get. The aftermath was messy and unsatisfying. The officer who urinated on me took a plea deal for misdemeanor assault, resigning from the force but avoiding any real jail time. The other 5 officers faced no criminal charges. Internal Affairs recommended 2 of them be fired, and the other for be suspended, but the police union immediately filed appeals, a process that could drag on for years. The system, as always, was protecting its own. Captain Adams was demoted to a desk job in the records department, a quiet, professional execution. A few months later, the city, true to its word, announced the formation of a civilian oversight panel. They asked me to serve as its chair, but I turned them down. I recommended Nicole instead. She had found her voice in this fight, organizing community meetings and becoming a fierce advocate for police reform. She had a fire. I was just tired. 9 months after the attack, on a cool Tuesday morning, I laced up my running shoes. My hand shook as I tied the laces. I stepped out my front door and started to jog down Oak Street. Every passing car made my heart hammer against my broken, healing ribs. But I kept going. A neighbor waved. Another jogger nodded. I made it to the end of the street and back. It was only 2 blocks, but it felt like a marathon. It was a victory. The settlement check arrived in the mail a few weeks later. It had more zeros than I had ever seen in one place. But as I stood there in my mailbox, looking down the peaceful, tree-lined street where my life had been so violently upended, I knew that no amount of money could buy back my faith in the badge I had worn with pride for 30 years. The fight was over, for me at least. But the work I knew would never end. It would just find new people, new voices to carry it forward.